He grabbed her wrist in front of 40 people, and every single one of them looked down at their coffee. A powerful businessman, a woman who said no, a cafe full of witnesses who decided it wasn't their problem. Then one man stood up. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't someone's bodyguard. He was just a father sitting with his 8-year-old daughter. And he was the only person in that room who refused to pretend he didn't see what was happening. If you believe one person can still change a room full of cowards, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. The afternoon had settled into that comfortable, forgettable rhythm that upscale places work hard to manufacture. Soft jazz bleeding from speakers mounted in the corners, the low percussion of espresso machines. Conversations kept deliberately quiet so nobody had to hear anybody else. Harlow and Reed was the kind of cafe that charged $18 for a pour-over and made you feel slightly embarrassed for not knowing what a pour-over was. The furniture was the color of warm caramel. The lighting was designed to make everyone look slightly better than they actually felt. The whole place smelled like roasted coffee and money, and on a Thursday afternoon in late October, nearly every table was occupied. Damon Cross didn't particularly like places like this. He'd chosen the corner table automatically, the way he always did. Back to the wall, clear sightlines to both exits, the entrance visible without having to turn his head. 12 years with naval special warfare didn't just leave scars. It left habits that didn't know how to die. He'd been out for 3 years now, and he still sat facing the door in every restaurant, every waiting room, every parent-teacher conference at Emma's school where the other fathers talked about their fantasy football rankings, and Damon nodded along and watched the windows. Emma was 8, and she was currently deeply invested in drawing a horse on the back of a paper napkin. "It doesn't look like a horse," she said, frowning at it. "Sure it does." "Dad, it looks like a dog with a neck problem." Damon leaned over and studied it seriously. "Okay, it looks a little like a dog with a neck problem." She crumpled it and started over. He watched her and drank his coffee, which was actually very good even if it cost more than a full tank of gas, and for approximately 11 minutes, Damon Cross was just a tired single father on a Thursday afternoon with nowhere particular to be. Then the voice started. It came from across the room, not shouting yet, but the kind of voice that was building toward it. A man's voice with that particular quality of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Damon didn't look up immediately. Raised voices in public spaces were usually domestic arguments or someone on a phone call they should have taken outside. Not his concern. He watched Emma draw the second horse, which was already looking more like a horse. "I'm just saying you're making a mistake." The voice again, closer to the edge of something now. "I don't think I am." A woman's voice, controlled, firm, but with a current of tension running underneath it that Damon recognized the way you recognize weather changing. "You haven't even heard my full proposal." "I've heard enough, thank you. I'd like you to leave." Damon looked up. The man was somewhere in his mid-40s, thick through the shoulders in the way of someone who'd been athletic once and let it slide into something harder and softer at the same time. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost 4 figures and a tie the color of dried blood. His face was flushed at the cheeks and along the jaw in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with anger he was working to contain. He had his hand on the back of the woman's chair, leaning over her table in a posture that wasn't accidental. It was designed to make the space smaller, to make her feel enclosed. The woman was younger, late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked practical rather than styled. She had a laptop open on the table in front of her, and a coffee she hadn't touched, and the straight-backed posture of someone who had learned a long time ago that showing fear was a form of losing. "I've invested a lot of time in pursuing this partnership," the man said. His voice had dropped, which made it worse. "The least you can do is sit with me for 20 minutes. I've already told you twice. I'm not interested. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that." "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being clear. There's a difference." Something shifted in the man's face. The part of him that had been attempting charm gave up on it. He straightened slightly, adjusted his cuffs, and smiled in a way that wasn't a smile at all. "You know, a lot of people would consider it professionally damaging to be this dismissive of someone in my position." The woman looked at him evenly. "Is that a threat?" It's a reality. Then I'll manage. She looked back at her laptop. Deliberately, cleanly. It was a dismissal so complete it almost had a sound to it. And for 2 or 3 seconds, Damon thought the man might actually take the hint and walk away. He didn't. He reached down and closed her laptop. Not violently, slowly, deliberately, like he was proving a point about who controlled the space. The cafe had gotten quieter. Not silent yet, but quieter, the way rooms get when everyone is pretending not to watch something they are absolutely watching. I wasn't finished, the man said. The woman looked at her closed laptop. Then she looked at him. Open it back up, she said, and her voice was very steady and very quiet. Or I will ask the staff to remove you. The staff? He laughed, short and humorless. Sure, go ahead. She started to rise. He put his hand on her arm. Not grabbing, not yet, but that particular kind of contact that doesn't ask permission and isn't meant to. The kind that says, I decide when this conversation ends, not you. Daddy. Emma's voice was very small. Damon looked at his daughter. She wasn't drawing anymore. She was looking across the room with her crayon held loosely in her hand, and she had that expression she got sometimes, not frightened exactly, but aware in a way that an 8-year-old shouldn't have to be aware. She'd had it since she was 6, since the night Damon had driven 3 hours in the dark to bring her home from her mother's house after a phone call that he still couldn't think about without something going cold in his chest. She looked scared, Emma said. Damon was already standing. He didn't move fast. There was no reason to move fast yet, and moving fast would change the nature of what this was before it needed to change. He walked across the cafe the way he walked most places, unhurried, not quite casual, the kind of movement that doesn't announce itself until it has to. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and cargo pants and the boots he wore when he did renovation work on weekends. He looked like someone's dad. He looked like a man who'd stopped in for coffee on the way to somewhere else. He stopped at the edge of the woman's table. Excuse me, he said. Both of them looked at him. The man's expression was impatient, already assembling itself into dismissal. The woman's expression was harder to read, a kind of cautious, measuring assessment, like she wasn't sure yet whether this was better or worse. Damon looked at her directly and asked the only question that actually mattered. Do you know him? A beat. Something moved across her face. No, she said. I don't. Damon nodded once. Then he looked at the man. Then I'm going to need you to step back and take your hand off her arm. The man stared at him. He had the particular look of someone who genuinely could not locate, anywhere in his prior experience, a reference point for this situation. Someone in a gray t-shirt and work boots had walked over and addressed him like a malfunctioning piece of equipment. Who the hell are you? Nobody you need to worry about if you step back right now. You need to walk away, friend. I'm not your friend, Damon said pleasantly, and I'm not walking away. Step back. The man's hand was still on the woman's arm. He looked at it, then looked at Damon, and there was a calculation happening behind his eyes that Damon had seen before. The calculation of a man who had always gotten away with things trying to decide how far he could push this particular situation. You have any idea who I am? Not really. Doesn't change anything. I could have your... He stopped, recalibrated. I'm in the middle of a private conversation. She told you she's not interested. She asked you to leave. She said no about 4 different ways, and you're still here with your hand on her. Damon's voice hadn't risen at all. That's not a conversation anymore. Mind your business. This is my business now. The man let go of the woman's arm. Damon watched his hands. You always watch the hands. For a moment, nothing happened. The cafe was almost completely silent. At the counter, one of the baristas had stopped pretending to clean something and was watching openly. 2 women at the nearest table had pushed back slightly in their chairs, unconsciously creating distance. Then the man shoved him. Both hands flat against Damon's chest, a hard shove that was meant to send him stumbling back and establish the physical hierarchy of the situation. It was an amateur's move, the move of someone who had pushed people around before and had it work because people tend to back down when their personal space is violated. The physics of it were straightforward. The expectation was clear. Damon didn't move. He had 192 pounds, most of it built during years that had required his body to be functional in the way that a tool is functional rather than the way a photograph is attractive. He'd taken hits in training exercises that had put men twice this guy's size on the ground. A shove in a cafe with civilian onlookers and his daughter watching from across the room barely registered as input. He just stood there. The man's expression flickered. He'd expected something different. "Don't do that again," Damon said. The punch came from the right, wild and looping, telegraphed about a full second before it arrived. The swing of someone who was genuinely angry rather than trained, all shoulder and momentum and the conviction that sheer force was sufficient. Damon leaned left, the movement minimal and unhurried, and the fist went past his ear close enough that he felt the displaced air. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Damon caught the man's extended arm at the wrist and elbow, used his own forward momentum against him, turned him, and walked him 2 steps sideways into the wall beside the nearest booth, with his arm pinned behind him at an angle that was carefully calibrated. Uncomfortable enough to end the conversation, controlled enough not to break anything. His forearm was across the man's upper back, not his neck. His body weight handled the rest. The man was pressed against the wall, breathing hard, completely immobilized, and Damon hadn't hit him once. "That's done now," Damon said quietly. He wasn't breathing hard. "When I let you go, you're going to collect your things and you're going to leave. We understand each other? Get off." "I need to hear yes." A strangled sound. Then, "Yes." Damon stepped back and released him. The man turned around. His face had gone through several colors in the last few seconds and had landed somewhere between humiliation and barely contained fury. He straightened his jacket with shaking hands. He looked at the room, at the baristas, at the customers, at the cafe full of witnesses, and something in his expression shifted as he seemed to understand for the first time that everyone had seen all of it, every part of it. The woman had moved. She was standing several feet away, near the edge of the neighboring table, and she was watching Damon with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not relief exactly, something more complicated than relief. "Are you all right?" Damon asked her. She looked at her arm where the man had grabbed it. There'd be a mark there tomorrow. She knew it. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." The front door of the cafe swung open and 2 security guards came in at a half jog, their radios crackling, their faces carrying the alert expression of men who'd gotten a call and didn't know exactly what they were walking into. They stopped when they saw the room, the stillness of it, the man in the rumpled expensive suit against the wall, the man in the gray t-shirt standing in the middle of the floor looking, to all appearances, entirely unbothered. "Sir," one of them started. "He was just leaving," Damon said. He turned around and walked back to his corner table. Emma had not gone back to drawing the horse. She was watching him with her crayon still in her hand and the particular expression of a child who has witnessed something she is going to need to process for a while, and who is also, underneath that processing, certain of something she hasn't found the words for yet. Damon sat down, picked up his coffee. It had gone a little cold. "You okay?" he asked her. She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Yeah," she said. "Are you?" "Yeah." "You didn't hit him?" "No." "How come?" He looked at her across the table, this small person with his eyes and her mother's stubbornness and a heart that he was more proud of than anything else in his life. "Because I didn't have to," he said. "Hitting people is a last resort. You use what you need, nothing more." Emma considered this the way she considered most things he told her. Seriously, turning it over, filing it somewhere. Then she looked back down at her napkin and picked up her crayon. "This horse still looks like a dog," she said. "Little bit," he agreed. Across the room, the man in the expensive suit was collecting his briefcase. He was moving quickly now. He didn't look at anyone as he walked to the door, and he didn't look back when he pushed through it, and the sound of it swinging shut behind him was the quietest sound in the world. At the corner table, Damon Cross drank his cold coffee and watched his daughter draw. His heart rate was 62 beats per minute. It had never been anything else. The security guards didn't know what to do with Damon. That was the thing about situations like this. The people whose job it was to manage them were always the last ones to arrive, and by the time they got there, the geometry of the situation had already shifted into something their training hadn't prepared them for. The two men stood near the entrance with their radios and their vests and their practiced expressions of authority, and they looked at the room and found nothing obviously wrong with it. The man in the expensive suit was already gone. The woman was standing near her table, unhurt. The man everyone had apparently been afraid of was sitting in a corner drinking cold coffee with a child. One of the guards, younger, with a close fade and the kind of careful posture that said he took his job seriously, walked over to Damon's table. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance." "There was one," Damon said. "It's over." "Can I ask what happened?" "A man was bothering that woman. He put his hands on her, and then he took a swing at me. I restrained him. He left." The guard looked at him for a moment, trying to locate something in Damon's face that would tell him how to categorize this. He didn't find it. "You restrained him?" "Yes. And you are—" "A customer," Damon said. "I had the corner table. I was here for the coffee." The guard looked at Emma, who looked back at him with the frank, unblinking appraisal that 8-year-olds deploy on adults they haven't decided about yet. "He really was just drinking coffee," she said helpfully. The guard pressed his lips together in a way that was almost a smile. He looked back at Damon. "Anyone hurt?" "Not seriously. The woman should probably document that he grabbed her arm. There'll be bruising." The guard nodded slowly, the professional part of his brain already moving to next steps, and he excused himself and went back toward his partner near the door. Damon watched them confer in low voices, one of them speaking into his radio, and he looked over at the woman's table and found that she was already looking at him. She'd sat back down. Her laptop was open again, which struck him as either very focused or very stubborn, possibly both. She had that quality some people carry of never quite letting you see the full thing, like there were rooms in her expression with the doors pulled almost closed. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked back at her screen. The cafe had not returned to normal. That particular brand of ordinary afternoon noise hadn't come back yet. Conversations had resumed, but they were quieter and pointed in the wrong directions. People talking to their companions but looking sideways at Damon's table, at the woman, at the space near the wall where the altercation had happened. The barista behind the counter was the one who'd stopped pretending to clean, and she still hadn't started again. Emma had gone back to her horse. It was better now, had actual legs that looked like legs rather than rectangular suggestions of legs. "Can I get a hot chocolate?" she asked without looking up. "You can have a hot chocolate, with the little marshmallows." "I'll ask." He flagged down a passing server and asked about the marshmallows, and the server said they had the mini ones, and Emma's face did the thing it did when a minor logistical problem resolved itself favorably. Damon ordered it, and the server moved away, and he looked across the room again. The woman was watching him again. This time she didn't look away when he noticed. She stood up. He watched her gather herself in a particular way, straightening her jacket, closing her laptop most of the way, picking up her coffee cup, even though it was probably cold. The small inventory of gestures that people run through when they're about to do something they've decided to do and want to make sure they've decided correctly. Then she walked across the cafe toward his table. She stopped at the edge of it. Up close, she looked younger than she had from across the room, or maybe just more tired. There was something behind her eyes that wasn't quite strain and wasn't quite exhaustion, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "I want to thank you properly," she said. "Do you mind if I sit for a moment?" Damon gestured at the empty chair across from him. She sat, looked at Emma, who had looked up from her drawing with open curiosity. "Hi," Emma said. "Hi." The woman's expression shifted slightly. Something in it softened around the edges. "Is that a horse?" "It's getting there," Emma said, which was an accurate assessment of the situation. The woman looked at Damon. "I'm Isabella," she said. She didn't offer a last name, which he noticed but didn't think much about. "Damon, this is Emma." "Emma." She said it like she was placing it somewhere. "How old are you?" 8, Emma said. "And 3 months. My dad says the months stop mattering after a certain age, but I think they still matter until you're at least 10. Something that might have been a genuine smile crossed Isabella's face. It looked like it surprised her. "I think that's probably right," she said. She looked back at Damon. The smile was gone, replaced by something more deliberate. What you did. I want you to know I'm not used to that. Someone stepping in. Most people don't. No, they don't. A pause. You did it before you knew anything about me. Didn't need to know anything about you. She studied him. He had the feeling she was a person who looked at things carefully before forming conclusions, and he let her look. Can I ask what you do? She said. Renovation work mostly, some contracting. Was in the Navy before that. Was. 3 years out. She nodded. And you're here because Thursday is our café day, Emma said, without looking up from the horse. We come every week. Dad gets coffee and I get hot chocolate, and we don't talk about school stuff. Isabella looked at Damon, who shrugged slightly in a way that confirmed this without editorializing it. That sounds like a good Thursday, she said. It usually is, Emma said. The hot chocolate arrived. Emma received it with appropriate gravity and immediately began making the mini marshmallows into a small raft formation. Isabella watched this for a moment with an expression Damon couldn't entirely decode, not exactly wistful, but somewhere near it. That man, Damon said. You'd met him before today? Isabella brought her attention back to him. He's been trying to get a meeting with my team for about 4 months. I declined. He escalated to requesting it himself. I declined again. She looked at her coffee cup, turning it slightly in her hands. He apparently decided that running into me here, I come every Thursday, which I may need to rethink, was an opportunity to try in person. He knew your schedule. Apparently. Her jaw tightened slightly. Which is its own problem. It is, Damon agreed. He filed it away, not because it was his business, but because the habit of noting things that didn't add up was as deep in him as the wall-facing seats and the door watching. When he closed your laptop, Damon said, that was the point where it stopped being uncomfortable and started being something else. Isabella looked at him. Yes, that's exactly where it was. Did you think someone was going to help you? A beat. No, she said simply and without self-pity. I was calculating how to end it myself. And? I had options. None of them were particularly clean. He nodded. He believed her. The sound level in the cafe had crept back up a little. The barista had resumed her cleaning. 2 of the customers who'd been watching had gone back to their laptops, though one of them kept glancing over every few minutes in the way of someone who was going to have a story to tell later that evening. What was his name? Damon asked. The man. Isabella looked at him with a flicker of something. Reassessment, maybe. Preston Carr. He runs a development company out of Houston. About $200 million in real estate and hospitality. She paused. Why? Just asking. You're not just asking. He met her eyes. She was sharper than her composure let on, or maybe her composure was the proof of it. He knew your schedule, Damon said. That means he either has someone on your staff or he's been watching you directly. Either one of those is worth taking seriously. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, more like something she'd been arguing with herself about being confirmed from outside. I know, she said quietly. I know that. Okay. It's complicated. It usually is. Emma had finished the marshmallow raft and was now drinking the hot chocolate through a system that involved tilting the cup at exactly the right angle to consume chocolate and marshmallows simultaneously. She was concentrating on this problem with the same focused intensity she brought to the horse drawings, unaware or pretending to be unaware that the adult conversation at her table had shifted into something heavier. Damon looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he looked back at Isabella. You going to be all right today? Getting home? She blinked. Yes. I have a driver. Okay. I'm not. She stopped herself. I'm not the kind of person who needs to be looked after. I can see that. I'm asking anyway. A pause. Something about it seemed to land differently than she'd expected. Yes, she said. I'll be fine getting home. Good. She stood, picked up her coffee. She was composing herself again in that particular way of hers, and he watched her do it without remarking on it because some people needed to rebuild the wall after you'd seen through it for a minute, and the decent thing was to let them. The man with the driver is Marcus Vale, she said abruptly. Damon looked at her. Preston Carr's primary contact inside my organization, she said. I've suspected it for about 3 weeks. I haven't been able to prove it yet. She said it quickly and quietly, looking not quite at him, the way people say things they've been holding for a while when they finally say them to someone. You're the first person I've said that out loud to. I don't know why I'm telling you. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, sometimes it's easier with a stranger. Maybe. She looked at him then, directly. Or maybe it's easier with someone who's already demonstrated they're not going to look the other way. He held her gaze. Whatever it is, he said, that's a serious problem. If it's true. If. You need to move carefully. Document what you can. Don't tip your hand until you know the shape of it. I know how to handle my own company, she said, and there was an edge to it. Not hostile, just firm. The edge of a person reminding both of them where the line was. I know you do, he said. He meant it. She nodded once, looked at Emma. It was nice to meet you. Emma looked up from her now empty cup. You should come back next Thursday, she said. We'll be here. Isabella looked at her for a moment, then at Damon, briefly, with an expression he didn't try to interpret. Maybe, she said. Take care of yourselves. She walked back across the cafe to her table. Damon watched her go for a moment, not in the way of attraction exactly, though she was attractive, but in the way he watched everything, out of a habit that was part caution and part the inability to stop cataloging the world. She sat back down, opened her laptop fully, and within 30 seconds looked completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. The performance of it was so complete that it might not have been a performance at all. Emma was looking at him. What? He said. Nothing, she said, with the particular intonation of an 8-year-old who has several opinions she's decided not to share yet. You're making your thinking face. I make lots of faces. Emma. She looked back at her drawing. She has sad eyes, she said, even when she smiles. Did you notice? He had noticed. Drink your hot chocolate, he said. The next 40 minutes passed quietly. Damon read something on his phone and didn't retain much of it. Emma finished the horse, and it was genuinely good. She'd gotten the proportion of the head right, and the legs had real weight to them. And he told her so, and she accepted the compliment with the measured acknowledgement of a professional receiving reasonable feedback. He paid the check. She gathered her crayons. He helped her into her jacket, which had a zipper that stuck at the bottom and required a particular angle to get started, a flaw they'd been meaning to deal with for 6 months, and hadn't. Isabella was still at her table when they left. She didn't look up. The afternoon outside was gray and cool, the kind of October day that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to commit to autumn. Emma walked beside him with her hands in her pockets, her sneakers scuffing the pavement in the comfortable, distracted way of a child whose body was moving on autopilot while her brain was somewhere else. They were 2 blocks from the cafe when she said, Dad? Yeah. That man. The one in the suit. She paused. Was he the bad guy? He thought about how to answer that in the way he always thought about how to answer her questions, honestly, but not in ways that gave her images she'd carry to sleep. He was someone who does bad things and has gotten away with it long enough that he forgot it was supposed to stop somewhere. She considered this. But it stopped today. Yeah, it stopped today. Because of you. Because he chose to do it in front of someone who wasn't going to look away, Damon said. That's different. She thought about this for a block and a half. Then she said, Is the lady going to be okay? He put his hand on top of her head briefly, the way he did sometimes when he didn't have a clean answer. I think she's tougher than she looks, he said. She looks pretty tough, Emma said. Yeah, he said. She does. They walked to the car. He unlocked it and she climbed into the back seat and he closed the door and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the gray October air, looking at nothing in particular. The city moved around him the way it always did. People on phones, a delivery truck idling at a yellow light, a kid on a bike cutting too fast through the crosswalk. Marcus Vale. He didn't know the name. He didn't know the situation. He'd done what he'd needed to do, and that was the end of it. And he was a man who did renovation work now, and whose Thursdays were for his daughter, and cold coffee, and the business of a CEO with expensive problems was not his business. He got in the car. Can we get tacos? Emma asked from the back seat. It's 4:30. Early dinner. You just had hot chocolate. Hot chocolate isn't food, Dad. It's a beverage. He started the car. In the rearview mirror, her face was lit from the window, and she was already back to examining her horse drawing with the focused appraisal of an artist still deciding if the work was finished. Fine, he said. Tacos. She didn't look up. I knew you'd say yes. He pulled out of the parking space and into traffic and drove, and he almost didn't think about the woman in the cafe again until they were halfway to the taco place, and his phone buzzed on the passenger seat with an unknown number, and he glanced at it and then back at the road and let it ring through to voicemail. He'd check it later. He had tacos to get first. The voicemail was 12 seconds long. No introduction, no preamble. Just a woman's voice, controlled and precise, with something slightly careful in it, the way words get careful when someone isn't sure they're making the right call. This is Isabella. I'm sorry to contact you. The cafe gave me your number from the payment records, which I realize is probably unsettling, and I'll explain that more if you call back. There's something I need to discuss with you, not an emergency, but soon would be better than later. You can call or not call. I understand either way. Then silence. Then the line cut. Emma was at the table eating her second taco and reading something on the tablet with the earbuds in, and Damon stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand listening to the 12 seconds twice more. The cafe had given her his number from the payment records. He'd paid with a card. That meant she'd talked to a manager and given a reason, or given a name, or both. And either one of those things implied a level of authority that most people didn't carry into conversations with cafe managers. He thought about the way she'd said Marcus Vale, quickly and quietly, like releasing pressure. He called back. She picked up on the second ring. Thank you for calling, she said. What happened? Nothing acute. I wanted to be clear about that. I'm not in danger right now. I'm home. A pause. I wanted to reach you before I thought myself out of it. Thought yourself out of what? A longer pause. Outside his kitchen window, the October evening had gone dark, and the street was doing its quiet suburban nighttime thing. Porch lights, a dog somewhere, the muted percussion of a neighbor's television through the shared wall. I had my security team run a check on the cafe's parking lot footage after I left, she said. Preston Carr didn't come alone. He had someone in a car outside who was monitoring the entrance. My head of security flagged it about an hour ago. She stopped. The person in the car was Marcus Vale. Damon didn't say anything. So the man I've suspected of feeding information to someone trying to undermine my company was personally present to watch a planned encounter with me, she said, in a location that should have been private, that I've been going to every Thursday for 8 months. That's not a coincidence. No. Have you talked to your security team about the full scope of what you think Vale's been doing? My head of security is also someone Vale hired 2 years ago. I don't know what the overlap is yet. Her voice was steady, but there was something strained underneath it, the sound of a person holding a lot of weight with very good posture. I don't know right now who in my immediate structure I can trust with the full picture. That's the problem. Damon leaned against the kitchen counter. Through the doorway, he could see Emma's profile, the light of the tablet on her face, her feet tucked up under her on the chair. Why are you telling me this? He said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Another pause. When she spoke, it was more careful, like she was choosing the words in real time. Because you walked across a room today without any reason to, without any stake in the outcome, without calculating what it was worth to you first. She stopped. I'm surrounded by people who are very good at calculating what things are worth to them, and right now I need... She didn't finish the sentence the way she'd started it. I need someone outside of it to know what's happening. In case. In case what? In case something happens and the people who should be paying attention don't. The weight of that settled between them on the phone. Isabella, I know how it sounds. It sounds like you're scared, he said, and I think you've been scared for a while and working very hard not to look like it. Silence. A long one. Yes, she said finally. The single word had something bare in it. Damon closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, Emma was still reading, feet still tucked up, entirely elsewhere. He thought about what he was now. A man who fixed walls and drove his daughter to school and came to this cafe on Thursdays. He thought about what he'd been, the other thing, the version of himself that had operated in darkness in places where the stakes were not metaphorical. He thought about the 12-second voicemail, the word soon. "Tell me everything you know about Vale," he said. "From the beginning. Don't edit it down. Tell me the full thing." He heard her exhale. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. The sound of a breath held too long finally let go. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She talked for a long time. She talked for 41 minutes. Damon didn't interrupt much. He asked 2 questions, both of them clarifying, and otherwise let her talk. Because the thing she needed most right now wasn't someone to solve it for her. It was someone to hold the weight of it alongside her while she laid it out in sequence. He'd learned that a long time ago, in circumstances far darker than this kitchen, that sometimes the most useful thing you could do for a person was to be a container for what they were carrying. Marcus Vale had been with Hawthorne Group for 6 years. He'd come in through a board recommendation. A man named Gerald Ashby, who held 11% of the company's shares and had been a fixture in the organization since before Isabella had taken over from her father 4 years ago. Vale's official title was Chief Operations Officer, which meant he had access to nearly everything: contracts, vendor relationships, acquisition strategies, the internal financial modeling that told the company where it was moving next. He was 53, twice divorced, had a reputation for being abrasive in meetings but consistently effective, and Isabella had inherited him the way you inherit furniture that was there before you arrived. Present, functional, harder to move than you anticipated. The first thing that bothered her, she said, was a deal that fell apart 14 months ago. A hotel acquisition in the Pacific Northwest that Hawthorne Group had been quietly pursuing for the better part of a year. 3 days before the final term sheet was supposed to be signed, the seller pulled out, went with another buyer at a price that was, as far as anyone could tell, nearly identical to Hawthorne's offer. The other buyer was a holding company with a complicated structure that took 4 months to trace, and when it finally resolved itself, it pointed toward a private equity group with no obvious connection to anyone at Hawthorne. Except that 6 weeks later, Preston Carr's development company acquired a 30% stake in that holding company. "I didn't connect it immediately," Isabella said. "We lose deals. It happens. The timing was suspicious, but I didn't have anything solid." "What changed?" Damon said. 5 months ago, we were finalizing an acquisition in the Carolinas. A resort property, family-owned. They'd been talking to us exclusively for 8 months. The night before we were supposed to fly down to sign, they called and said they'd received an unsolicited offer they couldn't ignore. She paused. "I found out later that the offer came through a broker that Preston Carr's company had used on 4 previous transactions. Same pattern? Same pattern. 2 major acquisitions, both in the final stage, both pulled away at the last possible moment by a buyer with direct or indirect connections to Carr." Her voice had gotten quieter as she talked, not because she was less certain, but because saying it aloud made the shape of it clearer, and the shape was worse when you could see all of it. For that to happen, the other party would need to know our offer before we formalized it. They'd need timelines, internal valuations, our negotiating floor. Information that lives inside about 5 people in my organization. And you think Vale is one of them? "I think Vale is the one," she said. 3 weeks ago, I had a friend, someone outside the company, someone I trust completely, run a quiet analysis on internal communication patterns. Message volumes, timing, metadata. She found a series of encrypted external communications originating from a device registered to a shell email account that traces back to a server cluster in Nevada. A pause. The account was created 9 days before the Pacific Northwest deal fell through. "That's not proof," Damon said. "No, it's not. Not the kind that holds up." "Does he know you're looking at him?" "I don't think so. I've been very careful." Then with a kind of honesty that cost something. "But I thought I was being careful about Thursday afternoons too." He let that sit. "Gerald Ashby," he said, "the board member who brought Vale in. Where does he land in this?" Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Ashby has been pushing for a restructuring vote for the last 2 quarters. He wants to bring in outside management consultants to review executive performance, which, Framed that way, sounds procedural. But the restructuring he's proposing would effectively reduce the CEO's authority over acquisition decisions and move a significant portion of it to the operations division. Which veil runs? Which veil runs? Damon turned this over. Outside, the dog had stopped barking. The neighbor's television had gone quiet. Emma had come to the doorway at some point during the conversation and looked at him with a tired face, and he'd held up one finger. 5 minutes. And she'd gone back toward her room without complaint, which meant she was more tired than she was letting on. The board vote, he said. When is it scheduled? 11 days from now. And if it passes, I lose meaningful control over the direction of my own company. Ashby doesn't have the votes on his own. He needs 2 more board members to come over, and right now it's close enough that it could go either way depending on what gets presented between now and then. She stopped. If Vale and Carr are working together, and Carr has been positioning himself to step into the acquisition space that Hawthorne currently dominates, then a successful restructuring vote gives them exactly the access they need without ever having to take the company from me outright. They just reroute it, quietly, from inside. Damon understood it now, the full shape of it. This wasn't a man who'd grabbed her wrist in a cafe out of wounded ego. That had been a miscalculation. Carr had been impatient, or impulsive, or both, and it had gone badly. But underneath the cafe incident was something far more carefully constructed. The cafe incident was noise. The rest of it was a plan that had been running for over a year. Why haven't you gone to the board with what you have? He said. Because what I have is suspicious timing and metadata from an analysis that wasn't officially commissioned and would raise questions I can't answer about how I got it. Because my head of security was hired by Vale and I don't know what he shared. Because the moment I tip my hand before I have something airtight, Vale either covers his tracks or accelerates the timeline and I lose the board vote before I can stop it. A pause. And because I've been doing this alone for 3 weeks, and doing something alone for 3 weeks makes you start to wonder if you've gotten the whole thing wrong. Have you gotten it wrong? A silence. Careful. No, she said. I don't think so. Neither do I, he said. Based on what you've told me. Another silence. Different quality. What would you do, she said, if it were yours to solve? He thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. You need documentation that's clean, obtained through channels that don't compromise you. You need someone technical who isn't connected to anyone in your current structure. And you need to move on the board relationships directly, without Vale knowing, in the next 10 days. He paused. You also need to handle the Carr situation separately. What happened today gives you grounds to pursue a harassment complaint through legal channels. You do that now on the record with witnesses. It establishes that he's a person who operates the way he operates, which matters if this ends up in front of a judge. I already called my attorney tonight, she said. Good. The witnesses are the problem. Most of the people in that cafe aren't going to want to be involved. Most of them, Damon said. A pause. Are you offering? She asked. I'm saying I was there and I saw what happened. Emma was there too, but she's 8 and you're not putting an 8-year-old in front of a deposition. Something that might have been a quiet laugh, brief and involuntary. No, definitely not. Then more seriously. I don't want to involve you in something that becomes complicated, Damon. You don't owe me this. I know. I mean that. You did something today that cost you nothing except a Thursday afternoon. What I'm describing is, it could get complicated. Most things worth doing are complicated. She didn't answer immediately. He heard her moving slightly, a chair maybe, or shifting position. I'll think about what I need, she said finally, and what I'm willing to ask. Okay? Can I contact you again if I decide? Yeah, he said. You can. They hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet of it, the phone in his hand, thinking about 11 days and a board vote, and a plan that had been running for over a year while a woman worked alone to see the shape of it. Then he put the phone on the counter and went to check on Emma. She was in bed but not asleep, reading with the small light on her nightstand, a chapter book with a cracked spine that she'd read at least twice before. She did that, came back to books she already knew the ending of, and he'd asked her about it once, and she'd said sometimes you want to know how it ends before you get there. He sat on the edge of her bed. Sorry that took a while, he said. It's okay. She marked her page. Was it the lady from the cafe? He looked at her. Why would you ask that? Because you talked for a long time and you had your serious voice. I have a serious voice? Dad, you have like 4 voices. There's the normal one, and the one when you're tired, and the one you use for people you don't know yet, and the serious one. She said this with the clinical precision of a child who has spent years studying her primary adult. You had the serious one. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Yeah, it was her. Is she okay? She's dealing with some things. Emma absorbed this. Are you going to help her? He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, and she'd already sorted most people into categories he'd spent decades arriving at. She looked back at him steadily, waiting. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded like that was a fair answer. She has sad eyes, she said again, quieter this time. The way you say something you've said before because it still seems true and still seems worth saying. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light and went back to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window and thought about nothing in particular for a while, which was what he did when he was actually thinking about something very specific and needed the nothing to organize it. The next 3 days moved the way days do when something is building underneath them, and you're not sure yet whether to call it trouble or responsibility. Damon had a job in Eastfield, a residential gut renovation, second-floor bathroom, and part of a load-bearing wall that the homeowners had decided needed to become a pass-through to the kitchen, which it could, with enough steel and enough care. He worked with a guy named Terrence, who was 62, and had done this work for 38 years and believed that every wall had an opinion about being moved, and you had to negotiate with it rather than simply demolish it. Damon had found this philosophy immediately convincing the first time Terrence explained it. He worked with his hands and thought in the background, the way he'd always been able to. The body doing one thing while something else ran underneath like a second channel. He thought about Veil and the metadata and the encrypted communications. He thought about Ashby and 11% and a restructuring vote that was architected to look like governance and function like a coup. He thought about Isabella in her cafe chair with the closed laptop in front of her, running calculations about how to end something herself because she'd stopped expecting help to arrive. On the second day, she texted, not called, texted, which seemed like a deliberate choice, easier to not respond to, easier to send without fully committing to the conversation. The message was short. I found something. Can we meet? He texted back when and where. Her response came 20 minutes later with an address. Not the cafe, somewhere else, a wine bar in a neighborhood he didn't frequent, 7 o'clock Thursday evening. Then, almost as an afterthought, you'd have to arrange something for Emma. He looked at the message for a second. My neighbor watches her sometimes, he replied. It's fine. He didn't examine too carefully why he'd said it was fine before he'd asked the neighbor. The wine bar was called something in Italian that he didn't bother translating, and it was quieter than he'd expected. Small tables, low light, the kind of place where people came to have conversations they didn't want overheard rather than to see and be seen. Isabella was already there when he arrived, at a corner table, which he noticed with something close to amusement. She'd chosen the same position he'd have chosen. Back to the wall, clear sightlines. She looked different than she had in the cafe. Not dressed differently, still professional, still composed, but there was something slightly less armored about her in this context. The careful architecture of the daytime version of herself slightly loosened. She had a glass of red wine in front of her that she'd barely touched. She had a leather portfolio on the table beside it. She stood briefly when he arrived, which was a formality he hadn't expected, and then seemed to recognize it was unnecessary and sat back down. Hi, she said. Hi. He sat across from her. A server appeared and he ordered water and then thought about it and changed it to coffee, and the server left them alone. How's Emma? Isabella asked. Negotiating. She wanted to know why she couldn't come. What did you tell her? That this was boring adult stuff. What did she say? That I was a bad liar. The corner of Isabella's mouth moved. She's not wrong. He looked at the portfolio. You said you found something. She put her hand on it. I want to say something first. He waited. I've been running this company for 4 years, she said.
My father built it from 2 hotels and a lot of stubbornness. I watched him do it from the time I was 12 years old, and when he stepped back, he gave it to me because he believed I could carry it.
I've worked every day since then to prove that was the right call. She paused. I don't ask for help easily. I'm not built that way. And I want you to know that reaching out to you wasn't a weakness. I've been trying to decide how to think about it. How are you thinking about it? Like it was tactical, she said, and also like I'm very glad I did it. He nodded. Okay, he said. What did you find? She opened the portfolio. What she had was more than suspicious timing. In the 3 days since their phone call, she'd done what she was capable of doing when she focused. And Isabella Hawthorne, whatever else was true about her, was capable of extraordinary focus. She'd pulled every contract modification request submitted through Vail's office in the last 18 months. On its own, unremarkable. But when she mapped it against the timeline of the 2 lost acquisitions, a pattern emerged that was visible once you knew to look for it. In each case, 48 to 72 hours before the competing offer materialized, there had been an internal document request run through Vail's credentials. A routine-looking query that pulled together current offer valuation, timeline to closing, and negotiating authority limits. The kind of query a COO might run for any legitimate reason. But it only happens twice, she said, tracing it with her finger. And both times it happens in the window immediately before we lose the deal. Does he run that kind of query regularly? That's what I checked. In the 18 months before the first lost deal, he ran that query type 4 times. In the following 14 months, he ran it twice. And both times align with what I showed you. She looked up. Nobody runs a query pattern twice in 14 months by accident. He was pulling what he needed and moving it through the encrypted channel your friend found. Presumably, I can't prove the connection directly yet, but the sequence is, it's tight, Damon said. He was looking at the documents, the dates, the query log she'd formatted cleanly across 2 pages. This is tight. There's more. She turned a page. Gerald Ashby is scheduled to present the restructuring proposal to the full board in 9 days. I requested a copy of the presentation through our legal team yesterday. Routine, pre-board distribution. She pulled a printed page from the back of the portfolio. The financial projections he's using to justify the restructuring include proprietary modeling data from our last acquisition analysis, data that wasn't shared with Ashby, data that lives in a folder that Vail has access to and Ashby does not. The room was quiet. Someone across the bar laughed at something, sharp and brief, and then it was quiet again. He gave Ashby the internal modeling, Damon said, to build a case for the vote. Yes. Her jaw was set. Her hands were very still on the table. Using our own confidential data to justify taking authority away from me. That's not just a breach of fiduciary duty, Damon said. Depending on how it's structured, that could be securities fraud, definitely tortious interference, possibly corporate espionage under federal statute. She looked at him. I read, he said. Not explaining himself further. She looked like she was reassessing something. Not in a bad way. My attorney says the same, she said. But she also says that moving on this before the board vote could panic the board, which could tip the vote the wrong way out of uncertainty. If I go to the board with a fraud allegation against my own COO 9 days before a restructuring vote, it looks reactive. It looks like I'm trying to shut down legitimate governance. She pressed her fingers together. I need to present this in a way that closes the loop before they have a chance to reframe it. You need it presented as a completed investigation, not an ongoing accusation. Exactly. Which means you need more than what you have. I need the encrypted communications tied to Vail directly. Not the account, not the metadata, something that puts Vail's hands on the channel. She looked at him steadily. My friend who did the initial analysis wants to do a deeper pull, but she says she needs access to the device registration logs for the Nevada server cluster. She can get to the edge of it through legitimate channels, but she needs a name attached to the original account setup, a real name. That's not nothing to get, Damon said. No, it's not. A pause. Do you know someone? He looked at her. The question sat between them. He did know someone. He knew several someones built from years in a world that operated through networks of competence and quiet obligation. He hadn't called any of them in 3 years. He'd left that world in a specific and deliberate way, and most of the people in it had respected the leaving, the way people respect a thing they understand even if they don't say so. Maybe, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, she said quickly. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not asking for anything that can't be done through legitimate forensic channels. I just need someone who knows how to navigate those channels faster than a standard engagement would move. 9 days is not a lot of time. No, she agreed. It's not. He was quiet for a moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. It was a habit he had, handling things without drinking them. Emma called it his fidget cup. If I make a call, he said, and if they're willing to move on this, it goes through proper channels. It's documented correctly, and at the end of it, what you have is something you can take into a room and put in front of people without anyone being able to question how you got it. That's exactly what I need. It might not be everything. You might get enough to make the case and not enough to make it ironclad. I'll take enough, she said. I know how to work with enough. He believed her. He set the coffee cup down. There's something else, he said. What? Carr. When he came to the cafe, you said he knew your Thursday schedule. That's not something you'd find through normal research. That's either surveillance or it came from inside. I know. Vale? Or someone Vale directed. I don't know the chain yet. If Carr's been feeding money to Vale and Vale's been feeding information back, Carr has been treating this as a business transaction the whole time. He looked at her. Which means today in the cafe wasn't just ego. He was there to see you directly, to make something happen. To establish personal contact, she said quietly. Force my hand into a meeting. If I refuse, he has grounds to claim I'm being obstructive in a business context he can characterize however he wants. And if the restructuring vote passes and Vale gains operational authority, Carr becomes the first outside partner with a foothold in our acquisitions pipeline, she finished, without ever having to disclose the relationship to the board. They looked at each other across the table. The full shape of it was between them now, visible from every angle. A year and a half of maneuvering, each piece placed carefully, and what Preston Carr had done on Thursday afternoon had been not an act of arrogance but an act of impatience, the move of a man who had been waiting for a plan to ripen and had decided to try to force the harvest. He didn't know about me, Damon said. No, Isabella said. You were not part of anyone's calculation. That helps. In what way? It means there's no contingency for it. Whatever they have planned for the next 9 days doesn't account for someone outside the structure who knows the shape of the thing and has no connection to anyone involved. He paused. That's an advantage. She studied him. There was something careful in her expression, something weighing one thing against another. I need to ask you something directly, she said. Go ahead. Why are you doing this? The question landed flat and honest, and she clearly meant it that way. Not as manipulation, not as a test, but as something she actually needed to know. She was someone who calculated, who measured, who had learned in 4 years of running a company that when something looks free it usually isn't, and she wanted to know what the cost of Damon Cross was before she went any further. He thought about how to answer her honestly. Emma is going to grow up in a world built by choices other people make, he said. Every time someone in a position to stop something wrong decides it's not their business, that world gets a little worse. He paused. I can't fix the world. I can fix the thing that's in front of me. And this is in front of me now. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the whole reason, she said, not skeptical, really asking. That's the whole reason, he said. Something in her face shifted, subtle. The kind of shift that happens when a person who has been waiting for a catch realizes there isn't one and doesn't quite know what to do with that information yet. Okay, she said finally, quiet. Okay. Outside, the city moved through its Thursday night. Inside the small Italian bar with the name he hadn't bothered to translate, a man who fixed walls for a living and a woman who ran a company that owned hundreds of them looked at a set of documents and began to plan the next 9 days, both of them aware that the margin was narrow and neither of them saying so out loud, because saying it out loud would have been the kind of thing that neither of them needed to hear to know. He made the call the next morning. It was early, just past 6, the house still dark except for the kitchen light, Emma not up yet. He stood at the back door with his coffee and his phone and looked at the yard which needed the leaves dealt with and hadn't gotten them dealt with yet. And he found the number in his contacts under a first name only, Ray, and pressed call before he could spend any more time deciding whether to. It rang 4 times. He was about to hang up when it connected.
"Well," said the voice on the other end.
I was wondering when this was going to happen. Ray Kowalski had retired from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service 14 months ago after 26 years, and he had the voice of a man who had spent those years in rooms with people who were lying to him and had developed an extremely fine-tuned sensitivity to anything that wasn't the plain truth. He was 61. He lived in Tucson, and the last time Damon had spoken to him was at a mutual friend's retirement party 3 years ago, where they'd stood outside in the parking lot for an hour and talked about nothing that mattered, and both of them had understood that it was actually about everything that mattered. "I need a favor," Damon said. "Obviously. You didn't call to discuss my garden." "You have a garden?" "I have ambitions toward a garden. It's mostly rocks right now." A pause. "What do you need?" Damon told him the shape of it. Not everything, not the café, not the personal pieces, just the forensic problem. The Nevada server cluster. The account registration. The need to tie a named individual to an encrypted communication channel through legitimate channels, documented correctly, in a way that would hold up in a legal proceeding or a boardroom, whichever came first. Ray was quiet for a moment. "That's a specific ask," he said. "I know. For someone who does renovation work now." "Yes." Another pause. "Is the person who needs this someone you trust?" Damon thought about Isabella at the wine bar, her hands on the portfolio, the question she'd asked, "Why are you doing this?" And the way she'd sat with the answer. "Yes," he said. "Okay." Ray's tone shifted into the practical register that meant he'd already moved past deciding and was into logistics. "I know someone at the FBI's cyber division in Phoenix. She owes me a conversation, which I can probably convert into a legitimate inquiry if there's enough foundation to justify it. You'd need to give me the existing documentation, the metadata analysis, the query logs, whatever your person has, and she'd need to run it through proper channels, which means it won't be invisible. Someone will eventually know that a federal inquiry was opened. That's acceptable. The goal isn't silence. The goal is clean documentation before a specific date. When? 9 days from now, a board meeting." Ray made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "You always did work on interesting timelines. Can it be done?" "I'll call Phoenix today. No promises on the outcome. I can get her to look at it. I can't guarantee what she finds or how fast. But if what you're describing is there, she's good enough to find it." A pause. "Send me the documents tonight. Secure channel? You still have the app?" "I'll reinstall it." "Do that." Another pause, shorter. "Damon." "Yeah." "You doing all right? In general?" He looked at the yard, the leaves, the morning light coming up gray over the back fence. "Yeah," he said. "Emma's good. Work is steady." "That's not quite what I asked." "I know." He picked up his coffee. "I'm doing all right. In general." "Good," Ray said. "That matters more than the rest of it." They hung up. Damon stood at the back door a minute longer, then went inside to start Emma's breakfast before she woke up. The next 7 days had the quality of 2 separate lives running in parallel and occasionally bumping against each other. During the days, he was in Eastfield with Terrence, working the bathroom renovation, getting the load-bearing situation assessed by a structural engineer who spent 45 minutes with a laser level and a very particular expression before declaring that the wall did in fact have an opinion about being moved, and that opinion was negotiable but would require a specific beam grade. Terrence received this news with the satisfaction of someone whose theory about walls had been externally validated. Damon priced out the beam and ordered it, and they worked around it, and everything moved the way renovation work moves. Forward, slowly, with problems that turned out to be different problems than you expected once you got into the wall. In the evenings, he talked to Isabella. Not every evening. Every other, mostly, and sometimes just texts. Quick updates, pieces of information, the small logistics of a situation being managed in parallel tracks. Ray's contact in Phoenix had opened a formal inquiry within 48 hours of receiving the documentation, which was faster than either of them expected. The inquiry was predicated on the encrypted communications metadata as potential evidence of wire fraud in connection with interstate business transactions, which was exactly the right framing. Federal jurisdiction, legitimate basis, clean chain of custody from the beginning. Isabella, on her end, was doing her own work. She'd identified the two wavering board members, a man named Thomas Delaney who'd been with the board for 9 years and tended to vote with whatever the prevailing financial argument was, and a woman named Christine Park, who'd been appointed 2 years ago and whose allegiance had always been more to sound governance than to any individual within the company. Isabella spent 3 days arranging separate conversations with each of them, not about the vote, not explicitly. She was too careful for that. She talked to Delaney about the company's acquisition pipeline and the strategic rationale behind the deals they'd pursued in the last 18 months. She talked to Park about governance standards and the importance of fiduciary clarity in executive operations. She was planting, preparing the ground without tipping her hand, and she was very good at it. Damon learned this about her in pieces, over the phone calls and the texts, in the way you learn someone when the circumstances force a certain directness and there's no small talk to hide behind. She was precise. She was faster at processing information than almost anyone he'd encountered, including people who'd been trained specifically to be fast at it. She had a dry humor that surfaced occasionally and seemed to surprise her when it did, like she'd forgotten she had it. She didn't complain about anything, but once in a while something in her voice shifted into a register that told you exactly how tired she was, even though the words themselves were reporting fine. He noticed those moments without remarking on them. On the 5th day, she called at 9:30, which was later than usual. "You okay?" he asked. "Vale asked me today if I was feeling all right," she said. Her voice was level, but had that particular quality of controlled. "He said I seemed preoccupied." He said it in front of 2 other executives in the hallway, very casually, very solicitous. A pause. "He was looking for a read, trying to determine if I know something." "What did you say?" "I told him I had a lot on my plate and that I appreciated his concern." She said this with a flatness that communicated very precisely what she thought of the concern. He smiled and walked away, and I spent the next hour checking whether he'd accessed anything in the system since our last documented timestamp. Had he? No, he's been quiet, which might mean he's satisfied or might mean he knows I'm watching and he's shifted channels. A pause. "I hate not knowing which." 9 days of not knowing is almost over, Damon said. 4 days now. 4 days? He agreed. A silence. Not uncomfortable. They'd gotten through the uncomfortable kind of silence sometime around day 3. This one had more room in it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Emma's mother. You don't have to answer." He looked at the kitchen ceiling. This was not a topic he opened willingly, but she'd asked directly and had also just told him she'd preface it with an opt-out, which meant she was being deliberate about it. "We were together for 5 years, he said. Married for 2 of them. She had a hard time with what the deployments did to a household, to the planning, the presence. I understood it. I still understand it." He paused. "It got complicated. It ended complicated. Emma was 4. I'm sorry. It's been 4 years. Emma's got 2 households, and she handles it better than most adults would." He looked at the ceiling. "Her mother remarried, moved to Phoenix. Emma goes for summers and 2 weeks at Christmas. Is it amicable?" "As amicable as it gets, which means we're civil and mostly avoid the topics that aren't." He paused. "She's a good mother. That's the thing that matters." "Yes," Isabella said, quietly. "That is the thing that matters." He let it settle. "What about you?" he said. It was a reasonable question given that she'd asked hers. "Me. Anyone." A pause. "Not at the moment. There was someone about 2 years ago. He was an architect, very good at what he did, very certain that my career was something that could be managed around, rather than something that needed to be genuinely accommodated." She said this without particular bitterness, the way you describe a thing that happened and you've finished being surprised by. He lasted about 11 months before it became clear that we had fundamentally different ideas about what accommodated meant. His loss, Damon said. A beat. That's a kind thing to say. It's also true. Another beat. Then she said quietly, with something in it he couldn't quite name, "You're a strange kind of person, Damon Cross." Strange how? You say exactly what you mean. You don't. She paused. Most people in my world wrap everything in 3 layers of implication because they're always managing something, an impression, an outcome, a relationship that might be useful later. You just say the thing. Seems like the simpler way to operate. It is. I'd forgotten that. Something shifted in her voice. I'd actually forgotten that was an option. He didn't have a response to that worth saying, so he didn't say one. And she didn't seem to need him to. On the 7th day, Ray called. Damon was in the truck, parked outside Emma's school, waiting for the afternoon bell. He picked up on the first ring. "Your federal friend in Phoenix came through," Ray said. "I'm sending you the summary now. Full documentation to follow through the secure channel within the hour." What did she find? The Nevada server cluster account was registered using a fraudulent business identity, a shell LLC called Meridian Ops Solutions. Incorporated in Delaware, no physical address, dissolved 8 months after it was created. The registration was funded through a payment processor that traces to a personal account. A pause. The account holder's name is Marcus Allen Vale. Damon was quiet for a second. "That's direct," he said. "About as direct as it gets. His name is on the funding transaction. The LLC used his home address during registration. They probably intended to use a different one, and it autofilled. Sloppy, but people get sloppy when they've been doing something for a year and nothing's gone wrong." Ray paused. "There's more. The Phoenix contact cross-referenced the account activity against the communication timestamps your person's friend identified in the metadata analysis. 12 communications occurred through that channel in the 14 months you were examining. All 12 occurred within 72 hours of significant internal activity at Hawthorne Group. 3 board presentations, 4 major acquisition filings, and 5 of what the inquiry classified as strategic planning communications. All of it inside the window. Every single one. And on 3 of the 12 occasions, the communication through the encrypted channel was followed within 48 hours by a corresponding inquiry from Preston Carr's development company to the same properties Hawthorne was targeting. Ray's voice was steady and professional, but he allowed himself a single note of something underneath it. "It's a clean line, Damon, the kind a good attorney can walk a room through without losing anyone." The school bell went off in the distance, faint through the truck windows. "The inquiry status," Damon said. "What's the formal disposition?" "Open federal investigation for wire fraud and potential securities law violations. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has been notified and is reviewing for parallel jurisdiction. Your person's attorney will receive a formal notification of investigation status within 48 hours, which she can present to the board as documentation that a federal investigation is active." Ray paused. "That's not the same as a conviction, but it's a lot more than an accusation." "It's enough," Damon said. "Is it?" "For what she needs it to be? Yes." He watched the school doors open, the first wave of kids spilling out. "Ray, thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Phoenix." "I'll do both." "One more thing," Ray said. "Preston Carr. The federal inquiry touched some of his corporate filings as part of the cross-reference. There are some irregularities there that the Financial Crimes Unit is going to want to look at independently. I don't have details yet, but I'd tell your person to make sure her attorney is ready for that to become its own conversation." "I'll tell her." He spotted Emma coming through the doors, backpack on, looking at the ground in the particular way she did when she was thinking through something that had happened during the day. She found the truck, and her expression shifted into the version she had only for him. Not performed happiness, just recognition. The specific face of a kid who's located her safe thing. He waved. She waved back and started toward him. "Ray," he said. "You said when I called that you were wondering when I'd call. What did you mean by that?" A pause. "I meant that 3 years was about the right amount of time." "For what?" "For you to do what you needed to do. Get out, get settled, get Emma squared away, and then for something to come across your path that needed the version of you that knows how to be useful in difficult situations. Ray's voice had something almost gentle in it, which was unusual enough that Damon paid attention. You're not a man who's built for permanent quiet, son. You can have the quiet, you should have it, but it's not the whole shape of you, and that's not a criticism. Emma was 10 feet from the truck now. Damon unlocked the door. I'll think about that, he said. You'll do more than think about it, Ray said. Take care of yourself. Give Emma my regards. He hung up just as Emma pulled the door open and climbed in, dropping her backpack on the floor and collapsing into the seat with the full-body deflation of a person whose day had taken something out of her. Rough one? He said. We had a substitute, she said, like this explained everything. Ah. She made us do the worksheet twice because she thought we hadn't understood it. She paused. We understood it the first time. That does sound rough. It was. She pulled the seatbelt across herself. Can we get a snack? We have stuff at home. Home snacks aren't the same as out snacks. That's not a real distinction. Dad. She looked at him with the expression of someone explaining something to a well-meaning person who is fundamentally not getting it. Home snacks are just food. Out snacks are an event. He pulled out of the parking space. There's a place on 5th that does those soft pretzels. With the cheese sauce. She settled back into the seat with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully navigated a negotiation. He drove, and she told him about the substitute in more detail, and he listened with the particular quality of listening that was really just being present, not solving anything, not advising anything, just being the person in the car next to her while she processed the day. He texted Isabella from the parking lot of the pretzel place while Emma was inside with a $5 bill and very specific instructions about the cheese sauce. Ray came through. Full documentation in an hour. It's Vail, direct and documented. Call your attorney tonight. The response came in under a minute. Understood. Thank you. I mean that. He looked at the message for a second, then typed, 3 days. Don't let him see you coming. Her response, he won't. He put the phone in his pocket and went inside to supervise the cheese sauce situation, which required supervision because Emma had a documented history of underestimating how much cheese sauce was the right amount of cheese sauce. The 2 days before the board meeting had a different texture, tighter, quieter, the way the air gets in the hours before a storm when everything is still, and you can feel the pressure building in it. Isabella was in motion, but invisibly. Meetings with her attorney, a carefully orchestrated conversation with Christine Park that moved from governance principles to a specific and documented concern about fiduciary breach, a separate conversation with Thomas Delaney's assistant to schedule a pre-meeting briefing that Delaney himself hadn't been told the full subject of yet. Vail was in the office, performing normal. Isabella watched him do it and kept her face exactly as it had always been and gave him nothing to read. On the evening before the board meeting, she called Damon at 7. Tomorrow morning, she said. How are you feeling? A pause. Like I need to be honest about that. Okay. Scared, she said. I'm scared. Not of the outcome, I believe we have enough. But of standing in that room and laying this out in front of people who have known Vail for years and watched me run this company for 4, and having them look at me and decide whether they trust what I'm presenting or whether they look for reasons to doubt it because it's easier. She stopped. 4 years of doing everything right, and it can still come down to whether the room decides to believe me. Yes, he said. It can. She'd probably expected a reassurance. He wasn't going to give her a false one. That's not comforting, she said. No, but you already know it, so telling you otherwise would be a waste of your time. He paused. You have a federal investigation status letter. You have documented evidence of at least 12 instances of information transfer tied directly to Vail's personal account. You have Christine Park, who I'm guessing you've already brought far enough in that she's going to arrive at that meeting with questions she didn't have before. Yes. And you have Delaney's pre-meeting, which means he walks into the room already unsettled about something, and unsettled people look for a clear argument to settle around. Yes. The room is going to believe you, Damon said, because you're going to give them something cleaner than doubt. A pause. Then quietly, I hate that I needed to hear that. You didn't need to. You knew it. You just needed someone else to say it out loud. Another pause. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Saying exactly what you mean. Trying to. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want you to be there tomorrow. I know it's a lot to ask. It's a board meeting. You're not affiliated with the company. There's no formal reason for you to be there. I could put you in the building as a consultant, but that's a stretch, and I won't pretend otherwise. He thought about it. What time? He said. 9 o'clock. The building is on Whitmore. I can have you listed with reception as a security consultant, which is technically accurate given everything. Technically. It's the best I have. All right, he said. I'll arrange something for Emma. A beat. The quality of the silence on her end was something he'd learned to read in the last week. This one was gratitude that she didn't quite know how to say. Damon, she said. Yeah. After tomorrow, whatever happens, I want you to know that you didn't have to do any of this. You could have walked out of that cafe and never thought about any of us again. I know. Why didn't you? He'd already answered this question once. He thought about saying so, but she hadn't forgotten the answer. She was asking again because it meant something different now than it had at the wine bar. Now it was a different question. Now it was, why did you keep going? Because Emma was right, he said. You have sad eyes even when you smile, and I don't think you had to. The silence lasted longer this time. That is, she said finally, and her voice had something unguarded in it, something that had slipped past the architecture of composure. Possibly the most direct thing anyone has ever said to me. Too much? No. A pause. No, not too much. He looked at the kitchen light, the familiar square of it on the counter, the ordinary Wednesday night closing down around him. Emma was in her room. The renovation was almost done. The leaves were still in the yard. Get some sleep, he said. You need to be sharp tomorrow. I know. A breath. Good night, Damon. Good night. He sat for a while after the call ended, not thinking about the board meeting exactly, more just sitting with the week behind him, the way it had moved, the way things had connected and built, and were now arriving at a single morning in a room he hadn't been in and didn't belong in by any conventional measure. He thought about Ray saying 3 years was about the right amount of time. He thought about Emma saying she has sad eyes, even when she smiles, the frank certainty of it, the way children sometimes see the exact thing that adults have trained themselves not to say. He got up and turned off the kitchen light and checked Emma's door. Dark underneath it, she was asleep, and went to bed and lay in the dark for a while. At some point he slept. He dreamed about nothing in particular, which was the best kind of night. He dropped Emma at the neighbor's at 7:45. Mrs. Paulson was 70 and retired and had a standing agreement with Damon that involved him fixing things around her house when they broke, which they did regularly, and her watching Emma on short notice when life required it, which it also did regularly. She opened the door in a bathrobe with coffee already in hand and looked at Emma and then at Damon with the particular expression of a woman who has seen enough of life not to need explanations for most of it. Board meeting, Damon said, which was not a lie and was not the full truth. Go, Mrs. Paulson said, and pulled Emma inside. Emma looked back at him from the doorway. She'd been told this morning that he had something to handle for a few hours, and she'd looked at him with the eyes that already knew more than he'd said and hadn't pushed it, which was either very mature or the result of her understanding that some questions don't get answered before breakfast. Tell her hi, Emma said. He looked at her. Who? Dad. He left before the conversation could develop further. The Hawthorne Group headquarters was on Whitmore Street, in a building that was not the tallest on the block, but was the most deliberate. The kind of architecture that communicates stability rather than ambition, the choice of an organization that had been somewhere long enough not to need to announce itself. Damon was listed at reception under security consultant, which got him a laminated badge and a slightly curious look from the desk attendant that he didn't acknowledge either way. He was shown to a waiting area on the 14th floor, outside the boardroom, and he sat in a chair and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling window and waited. At 8:52, Isabella came through the elevator with her attorney, a compact woman in her 50s named Renata Voss, who moved the way people move when they are constantly processing 3 things simultaneously. Isabella had a leather folder under her arm, and she was wearing a dark blazer and the same composed expression she'd carried across the cafe the first day, except that now he knew what lived behind it, and it looked different when you knew. She stopped when she saw him. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite surprise. She'd asked him to be here, she knew he'd come, but something adjacent to it. Like the knowing and the actually seeing were different sizes. "You came," she said. "Said I would." Renata Voss looked at him with the assessing efficiency of someone who categorizes people rapidly and accurately. "You're Damon Cross," she said. "Yes. I've reviewed your statement regarding the cafe incident. It's useful." She said this the way attorneys say things, functionally, without social padding. "The harassment complaint has been formally filed. Carr's legal team reached out yesterday. They're already negotiating the framing, which tells you everything about how they're feeling." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. We have other things to deal with this morning first." She looked at Isabella. "We should go in." Isabella looked at Damon. "There's no procedural reason for you to be in the room," she said. "I want to be clear that I know that, but I'd like you to be there anyway if you're willing, as—" She paused. "I don't have a clean title for what you'd be." "Witness," Damon said, "to what happened in the cafe. If it comes up. It may come up. Then I'm a witness." Renata Voss made a sound that might have been approval and turned toward the boardroom door. The room was already occupied. 8 people around a long table, 6 board members, an outside legal advisor, and Marcus Vale, who was seated 2 chairs from the head and had the practiced calm of a man who believed he knew how this morning was going to go. Gerald Ashby was at the far end, silver-haired and settled into his chair with the proprietary ease of someone who considered the room partially his. Christine Park was midway down the right side, and she had a legal pad in front of her with things already written on it, which was either normal for her or wasn't. And either way, it made Vale's assistant, seated behind him, shift slightly in her peripheral vision. Damon took a chair along the wall behind Isabella and did not introduce himself to anyone. Vale noticed him. It was brief, a flicker of the eyes, a half-second assessment, and then Vale looked back at his phone, and whatever he saw in Damon didn't read as a threat, because Damon was sitting quietly against the wall in a dark jacket, and there was no version of that picture that said dangerous. That was fine. That was exactly fine. The meeting opened with procedural language from the board chair, a man named Elliot Marsh, who was 70 years old and had chaired this board for 11 of them. He moved through the agenda items with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this enough times that the formalities were close to involuntary. There were 2 items before the restructuring proposal. Both were handled in 12 minutes. Then Marsh said, "Gerald, the floor is yours." Ashby stood. He was good at this. Had the measured confidence of a man who'd been in boardrooms his entire adult life, who knew how to make a proposal sound like common sense rather than maneuvering. He laid out the restructuring argument the way Isabella had described it: operational efficiency, executive accountability, the appropriate distribution of authority across senior leadership. He used the words best practices 4 times in 6 minutes. He presented the financial projections, the same projections that contained Hawthorne's proprietary modeling data, on a screen at the front of the room. Christine Park wrote something on her legal pad. When Ashby finished, Marsh looked around the table. "Discussion?" Isabella said. "I'd like to respond." She stood, opened the leather folder. "Before we discuss the merits of Gerald's proposal," she said, "I need to bring something to this board's attention that directly affects the integrity of this proceeding." She kept her voice level, clinical, the way you have to when you're presenting something that makes you furious, and you can't afford to look furious. The financial projections Gerald presented this morning contain internal modeling data from Hawthorne Group's most recent acquisition analysis. I know this because I recognize the specific assumptions. They match our internal document exactly, including a methodology adjustment our team made 8 days before Gerald's presentation was filed. That adjustment has never been shared externally. Ashby's expression shifted, slightly, controlled. "Isabella Suas," he started. "I haven't finished, Gerald." She placed the first document on the table and slid copies toward each board member. Renata Voss was already moving, distributing the packet she'd prepared. The query logs, the timeline, the documentation of the 12 communication instances. And at the back, On a single clean page with a federal letterhead, the notification of the active FBI investigation into wire fraud and potential securities violations linked to a specific account registered to Marcus Allen Vail. The room changed, not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like the atmosphere shifted, the way it does when something everyone has been breathing without noticing is suddenly gone and the air has a different quality. Thomas Delaney looked at the page in his hands and then looked at Vail. Marsh looked at Ashby. Christine Park set down her pen. Vail said, "This is," and stopped. He stopped because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse, and he was smart enough to know that even if he wasn't smart enough to have covered his tracks. Marcus Vail has been passing Hawthorne Group's confidential acquisition information to an outside party, Isabella said. That outside party is Preston Carr, whose development company has directly benefited from at least 2 transactions that Hawthorne lost as a result of that information being compromised. The pattern spans 14 months. The documentation you're looking at was compiled through legitimate forensic channels and is currently the subject of a federal investigation. She looked at Vail directly. The financial projections used to justify this morning's restructuring proposal came through the same channel. Vail said, "I want my attorney." "That's your right," Renata Voss said from beside Isabella. "You should call them."
This meeting, Ashby started, with a different energy now, the confidence draining into something scrambling. "This is highly irregular. You can't simply—" "What I'm doing," Isabella said, turning to face him, "is presenting documented evidence of a fraud that was conducted using my company's information to benefit an outside party and to facilitate a governance action designed to reduce my authority and increase theirs. What you do with that evidence is the board's decision. But I will not sit quietly in this room while a proposal built on stolen data is treated as legitimate governance." Silence. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that is full of people doing rapid internal calculations. Marsh looked at the federal letter for a long time. He was a man who'd been in difficult rooms before, and he processed things slowly and thoroughly, and when he looked up, he had the expression of someone who had reached the far side of the difficulty and found solid ground. "Gerald," he said, "I'm going to ask you to step out." "Elliot, I think we need to—" That wasn't a suggestion. Marsh's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "And Marcus, you should make that call." Damon didn't watch all of it. There were parts that were legal and procedural and happened in adjacent rooms with attorneys and hushed voices, and the particular bureaucratic machinery that takes over once the facts are established and the question becomes what happens to them. He sat in the waiting area outside the boardroom for the better part of 2 hours while Isabella worked the room that remained. 4 board members, Marsh, Renata Voss, and a conversation that he was not part of and was not supposed to be. He drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway and checked in with Mrs. Paulson, who reported that Emma had eaten 2 bowls of cereal and was currently teaching her how to draw horses, which Mrs. Paulson had apparently expressed interest in. He looked at his phone for a while and then put it away. At 11:40, the boardroom door opened and Isabella came out. She looked like someone who had been in a sustained difficult situation for 2 hours and was at the exact point where the sustained difficulty had ended and the body hadn't caught up to the news yet. There was something in her face that was not quite relief and not quite exhaustion, but contained both. The particular expression of a person who has been holding something very heavy and has just set it down and is still figuring out what to do with their hands. She saw him and crossed to where he was sitting. He stood. "Ashby's resigned from the board," she said. "Effective immediately. Vail has been suspended pending the federal investigation, which Elliot Marsh has committed the company's full cooperation to." She paused. "The restructuring proposal has been withdrawn." "The 2 wavering votes?" Park held. Delaney, to his credit, asked better questions than I expected once Ashby left the room. She looked at the folder in her hands. "It's not over. There'll be months of legal proceedings. Carr's attorneys are going to push back on every piece of the timeline. The FBI investigation will take as long as it takes." She looked up at him. "But the company is intact. The vote didn't happen. Vail is gone." That's what mattered most today. "Yes." She breathed out, slow and deliberate. "Yes, it is." He nodded. She looked at him with that look she had sometimes, the one that was trying to decide how to contain what was in it. "You didn't have to sit out here for 2 hours," she said.
Didn't have anywhere else to be.
Your renovation, Terrence can handle Tuesday. She pressed her lips together. Not quite a smile, something quieter and more real than a smile. Emma is going to want details. Emma is going to want a version of events appropriate for a third grader. And what version is that? That a lady at the cafe had a problem and we helped her fix it. Something moved in her face. That's a very simple way to describe 11 days. Simple is usually accurate.
She looked at him for a moment, long enough that it meant something, short enough that she wasn't sure she meant it to. "I'd like to take you to dinner," she said. "You and Emma. Not tonight. I need to sleep for approximately 16 hours, but this week. Somewhere that has mini marshmallows. Emma's going to hold you to that. I'm counting on it." He picked up his jacket from the chair. The Whitmore Street building was doing its quiet morning thing around them. Elevators, distant phones, the city outside the windows doing what cities do. Everything looked ordinary. It nearly always did from the outside. "Isabella," he said. "Yes." The sad eyes thing. He said it without patting, the way he said most things. "You should know they're less sad than they were 11 days ago." She looked at him. For a second, the full architecture of her composure was just not there, like a window left open. And what was underneath was not sadness, actually, or not only that. It was the face of a person who had been alone with something very heavy for a very long time and was standing on the far side of it and was genuinely not sure yet what came next. "I'll work on that," she said quietly. "I don't think you need to work on it," he said. "I think you just need to let it be different than it was." She held his gaze for a beat longer than either of them managed to be casual about. Then she straightened slightly and picked up the folder and said, "Tell Emma I'll find somewhere with the best hot chocolate in the city. She'll want that in writing. I'll send a formal memo." He almost smiled. She almost did too. They left it at that, which was the right place to leave it for now. He picked Emma up at 12:30. She was at Mrs. Paulson's kitchen table with a spread of napkin drawings between them. Horses mostly, but also what appeared to be a dog, a house, and an ambitious attempt at a giraffe. Mrs. Paulson looked like she'd been genuinely entertained for 3 hours, which was worth more than Damon could easily calculate. Emma gathered her drawings with the care of a person transporting important documents. In the car, she held them in her lap and looked at him with the assessing intelligence she'd had since she was old enough to use it. "Did it work?" she said. He pulled into traffic. "Yeah, it worked. Is the lady okay?" "She's okay." Emma nodded, satisfied. She looked out the window for a block, then, "Did you help?" "A little." "More than a little?" He glanced at her in the rear view. "Why do you ask?" "Because you have the face you have after you've done something hard, and it turned out okay." She said this plainly, without drama. It's different from the normal face. He drove. The October city moved around them, the trees along the boulevard holding the last of their leaves, the sky low and gray and indifferent in the particular way of autumn skies that have given up on being summer. "Yeah," he said, "more than a little." She nodded again, filing it. Then she held up the napkin drawing of the giraffe and examined it critically. "Mrs. Paulson thinks the neck is too short," she said, "but I think it's proportionally accurate. The neck does look a little short." "Dad." "Just saying." She lowered the drawing and looked out the window and after a moment said very quietly, not like a question, "You're a good person." He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say to it that wouldn't either dismiss it or make too much of it. He just drove, and she looked out the window, and the city went past them both. The thing about doing the right thing is that it rarely announces itself in advance. It doesn't come with paperwork that says this moment will matter. Stand up now. It arrives looking like a Thursday afternoon in an overpriced cafe, like cold coffee and a child pointing out that someone looks scared. It arrives looking like nothing, which is why so many people mistake it for nothing and stay in their seats. Damon had stayed in his seat for 3 years, not out of cowardice, out of something more complicated than that. The particular fatigue of a man who has spent a decade operating at the edge of what human beings are capable of doing to each other, who has needed the quiet badly enough to choose it deliberately. The quiet had been real. It had been earned.
Emma had needed it too. This version of her father who was home for dinner and at the school pickup and present in the ordinary, ongoing way that children need someone to be present. But Ray was right, in the way that people who've known you for a long time tend to be right about things you'd rather not examine. Quiet was not the whole shape of him. He'd always known that. He just needed a while to figure out what the rest of the shape was for, now that it wasn't for what it used to be for. He thought about Isabella in the boardroom. Not heroically. She hadn't needed a hero. She'd needed documentation and someone to make a call and someone to sit in a chair outside a room for 2 hours because they said they would. He'd done those things. They were small things. The plan had been hers. The courage to execute it in that room had been entirely hers. The 4 years of building something worth protecting had been hers alone. What he'd done was refuse to look away. That was all. Just that and not nothing. Emma fell asleep on the way home, which she would deny if you asked her about it, the napkin drawing still in her lap, her head tilted against the window. He drove carefully, the way you drive when someone is sleeping beside you and you don't want to wake them. When he pulled into the driveway, he sat for a minute before getting out. The house was ordinary. The yard still had leaves in it. The kitchen light was off, and the front porch needed a bulb replaced, which had been true for 2 weeks, and he was going to do it today. Emma stirred when the car stopped and looked around with the briefly confused expression of someone returning from somewhere. "We home?" she said. "Yeah." She looked at the house, then at him. "The giraffe's neck isn't too short," she said, with the conviction of someone who has settled the matter internally and is closing it. "Okay," he said. "It's not." "I believe you." She got out of the car. He followed. She went inside first, already talking about lunch, the drawings tucked under her arm, her voice carrying back to him through the open door in the particular unself-conscious way of a child who assumes the people she loves are always within earshot. He stood on the porch for a moment. Just a moment. The neighborhood was quiet, the afternoon going about its own business, and the world was exactly as large and as small as it always was. And somewhere across the city, a woman who had been alone with something very heavy was setting it down. And somewhere in Tucson, an old man was failing to grow a garden, and a little girl inside was debating the proportional accuracy of giraffe anatomy, and none of it was clean, none of it was finished. Most of it was just ongoing. Life being what it is, which is never the story you expected and frequently better than the one you wrote for yourself. He replaced the porch bulb first. Then he went inside to make lunch.